This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted.
Horror films sometimes have these really interesting plots that sound like you could be in for a quality horrific experience, until you see the movie and feel nothing but let down. It's a real shame when this occurs because imagination runs wild with all the possible avenues that the writers decide not to go down. The Purge franchise is one of those examples for me. The concept of a nation having a 12-hour window to commit any crime,
including murder,
without legal consequences is a horrifying thought. So why is it that the franchise is yet to hit an entry out of the park? With currently 5 movies and 2 seasons available, I want to find out why the landing hasn't stuck yet. What aspects are good and what could be improved on? I feel it's only appropriate to return back to the original. As I rewatch all these entries chronologically, I'll be making points accordingly. I originally planned to include every film in one video, but due to how long it's taken me just to cover 3, I'm going to hold off and save it for a potential part 2. The introduction is quite visually disturbing, which is everything you want in your horror film. A montage of cameras around the city telling the story of what a purge night is like. However, this is not an accurate representation of what we actually see when the purge night comes, which is a shame because the chaos riot-like violence is more aligned with what I was expecting to see. Within 10 minutes, the movie is centered around a high single-class family that makes no efforts to ensure that we really care whether or not they survive the annual holiday. Some of the dialogue and delivery is questionable at best, and that's the case throughout all of the Purge films.
I'm gonna hunt down my boss. That son of a bitch has it coming.
It's my night to motherfucking purge!
I got a wicked sweet tooth tonight. And I want my candy bar. And I'm gonna take it. You don't got the balls to stop me.
So the family we meet are called the Sandins. Ethan Hawke and Lena Headey star as the married couple. Even with these big names, I struggle to engage. The main issue is more to do with the children, especially the hornbag teenage daughter they have. I understand in movies that certain events need to happen in order to progress through the next act, but some events require a lot more suspension of disbelief than others. The most prominent example is the boyfriend of Zoe. Disheartened that her father does not approve of their relationship due to his age, so like any rational person would, he believes purging him will remove all issues and they will live happily ever after. Meanwhile, younger son Charlie aids a man screaming for help by allowing him to seek shelter in their fortified home. But because of this, some purgers arrive at Ethan Hawke's house, demanding they give up the stranger or they will become purged themselves. Now, I don't know about you, but I find the opening camera footage of murder being committed on the streets much more disturbing than whatever the fuck these people are doing here. I mean, like, what am I watching here? Look, even Charlie can't even handle the cringe. Like, nope, that's enough for me, I'm out. So we're about 40 minutes in and I'm already checked out. We don't care about the family, we don't care about the purges, and we don't care about the stranger who's potentially being sacrificed because we never get to know him. As soon as he is granted shelter like he was begging for, he turns around and has this very sinister look on his face, then spends the majority of the night tiptoeing around. There could have been some rapport build with the stranger and Sandin so that there was actually a tough decision for the viewer and family to make morally. He does end up clutch saving them at the end, so there is that, but regardless, there's just been too many issues for me to recommend watching this movie.
Just after 7 a.m. March 22nd, the annual Purge has just concluded. This is your American morning news program.
The second entry already has a much more interesting setting, with the focus being on multiple different characters. We have Frank Grillo, who I've always liked, preparing for a night of purging himself. We have a low-income family trying to sleep the night away without incident, and a young couple caught outside just before commencement. The multiple stories make the purge event feel raw and more nationwide. Without a doubt, the most interesting aspect is Frank Grillo's Punisher-like arc, seemingly seeking revenge for a lost child, which makes a point of premeditated purge plans are immediately more interesting than random god-wearing punks. When the sirens go, we see multiple groups of purgers preparing for the night, and this is actually pretty well done. You've got a guy slamming back a brewski with a rifle ready to take pop shots at anyone at range, groups of armed thugs with hounds to accompany them, and a school bus full of psychos. Without Frank Grillo's character, this movie wouldn't come close to hitting its highs, as the rest of the cast are nowhere near as compelling, although there is definitely more depth to them than the previous Sandins. This couple in particular are the frustratingly whiny damsels in distress, but as the film progresses, they become more self-sufficient with a somewhat emotional payoff. So it seems that an underlining issue in the first one was that our protagonists weren't all that layered, leaving us not that invested in their survival. But in the Purge Anarchy, we do care about the fate of these people, especially Frank Grillo. Definitely an improvement worth noting. Throughout the halfway mark, the Purge feels less like real crime being committed and more like a montage of dead rising psychopaths having their way.
I am not virus tonight. I am a one-woman fucking plague, and you're all in my path! I am the motherfucker son of a bitch. Holy shit!
Which isn't a bad thing per se, it just feels like the creators can't seem to figure out what tone they are going for. There's also small doses of humour that are injected throughout which surprisingly hit their mark. There is a genuinely funny moment between the characters where the group discusses whether or not to trust Frank Grillo's character.
All I'm saying is that he's out here, armed to the teeth on Purge night voluntarily. That means he's trying to do something nasty.
I can hear you.
Sorry.
Following some street running and tunnel evading, we head into a pretty contrived sequence when the group seeks refuge at a co-worker's house, only for it to go sideways due to this clown. The group is then kidnapped and traded to the upper-class purgers in an auction with the winner given the right to kill. Leo continues to rack up his kill count while we lose a member of the group. The anti-purge resistance arrives to wreak havoc and save the day. A cool nod to the original is the stranger that was aided by the Sandins is now a member of this militia.
Fuck you! Fuck your money! And motherfuck the Purge!
While the plot conveniences still tend to occur and it feeling much more like an action film than a horror film, it's a much improved entry. There are new and exciting things happening in the world, and we get a glimpse of the annual holiday from a multiple point of views. While still not an A-grade thriller or horror, The Purge Anarchy is much more worthy of your time than the original. Solid acting across the board, well, mostly. A broader narrative and gripping moments. This, in my opinion, is the best film of the series.
Just after 7 a.m. March 22nd, and the annual Purge has just concluded. This is your American Morning News program.
Rewatching the Purge election year, I started to regret my decisions to cover this series because I really don't like this one. But having said that, there are always interesting ideas or scenes added throughout that deserve credit, so let's do it. The opening is a family being held captive by a lone maniac with jarring, annoying camera angles spread throughout to reiterate just how disturbing this man is. This shaky effect in horror movies has always bothered me. I understand why, but I really don't believe it makes the situation any more horrific. It just looks cheap and quite frankly dog shit. A popular franchise that uses this effect consistently are the Saw films. During trap scenes, the same epileptic effect is inserted. I truly believe horrific moments would still be as disturbing without this shit. I could use many examples, but let's go with the opening Scream intro. The climactic moment when Drew Barrymore is brutally murdered in her own yard.
Casey.
Now let's add a shaky cam effect. Was that better? Let me know.
Absolutely not.
As the title suggests, politics are the centre focus. We get an inside look on the kind of propaganda our founding fathers like to spew, expressing displeasure at the opposition leader, Senator Charlie Rowan, as she is attempting to remove the concept of the purge altogether. Being the sole survivor of the opening scene, she was forced to watch her family be purged in front of her. She preaches how the purge only benefits the rich and insurance companies while the masses of poor communities suffer the brutal reality of the holiday. A nice welcome face returns. 2 years have passed since the events of the second, and Leo is now a bodyguard of the senator. We transition to a local cafe where we are introduced to this absolutely ridiculous subplot of these angsty teenagers being a menace to the owner of the cafe. Shoplifting, throwing products on the ground, this whole encounter is forced and predictable to where it will inevitably lead.
I'm giving you an out. Right? Give up the candy or I'll have to take it away from you.
You touch me, and I scream rape, you cocksucking pig. Now walk away.
This year's Purge has a slight difference, as now any high level of government can be purged just like anybody else. In order to secure her votes and relate to her fellow communities, she decides not to barricade herself in a fortress, but to stay in a seemingly middle-class house with her trusty bodyguards. Joe, the owner of the cafe, is unable to pay his Purge insurance for his business, and due to his sentimental connection, sees that he defends his property at all costs. There are some interesting ideas painted across this installment, with the concept of protecting yourself and property with Purge insurance, and Betty Gabriel's character Lainey being an on-road medic during the 12-hour holiday. A notable scene is Leo discussing why he is so committed to protecting the senator and loosely summarizes his actions in Anarchy. It's a nice nod for anyone who watched the previous title.
I lost my son some years ago. He was killed. I almost did something on Purge night that would have destroyed a lot of lives. I want this night gone. I know you do too.
We have a montage of Crazy Dead Rising bosses again, with ridiculous purges doing comically over-the-top killings like with this guillotine, mass chain spinning bandits with people attached to the hood, and these pillars with the big P word written across. The slow-mo effect and score we hear set such a serious tone, yet I can't help but laugh or take the piss out of all the ridiculousness. We have the return of the angsty teenagers to one of the most stupidly overreacted, poorly done sequence with some good old Miley Cyrus to top it all off. I hate all of this.
Happy Purge, you old...
As our man Leo tries to enjoy his drink, an elite group of armed Nazis break in to assassinate Senator Charlie. They swiftly escape with a hidden hatch and blow them up for good measure. A nice subtle entry of the ramifications of Purge Night is this truck driving past, a government-like cleanup crew for dead bodies, a brutal necessity in this twisted reality. Reminiscent of Anarchy, Leo is once again stuck out on the streets at night protecting a defenseless companion, until they are ambushed by some Russians and saved by Joe. Meanwhile, these stains on society continue to do random shit, but they eventually get what's coming to them, with a pretty badass kill spree from Lainey. After some time getting acquainted with each other, the Nazis catch up to the group and capture the senator, prepped and ready to be purged in front of the NFFA. But before the deed is done, Leo, the anti-purge resistance, and the rest of the supporting cast save the day with this thoroughly underwhelming shootout scene. The next 20 minutes are all over the place. A lot of gun pointing and yelling. We get a boss battle between the Nazi leader and Leo, which should be a lot more badass than it is. One thing that gives this last act a major disservice is the washed out, bland, brownish tint to everything, and although this has been notable throughout, like in Joe's cafe, the overexposed whiteness leaking into scenes just radiate a cheap look.
Appreciate that.
By the end, the senator survives the holiday, securing her votes and becoming the new United States president, assumedly putting an end to the Purge altogether.
Nice.
In summary, the Purge election year feels like a step backwards. We have similar issues I've criticised all entries thus far, and the characters still don't feel that fleshed out or interesting. The political themes related to what was going on at the time are blatantly obvious, and perhaps it's just me, but I just don't find what's going on behind the curtain in regards to the NFFA interesting. Well, there you have it, the first 3 Purge films, and I must say, I'm a little purged out at this point, but I hope you've enjoyed or at least found some parts where you can relate to. I wish these movies were better, and I really do believe that one day the creators could knock it out of the park and make a modern, thrilling masterpiece. But until then, I'll be living in the depths of mediocre entries, especially if I cover the TV series.
I'm gonna take your eye, and then I'm gonna take your sister. But before you bleed out, you're gonna see all of that, all of that, all of that.
Fuck.